A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
This is Andrew McLennan. Recently, we interviewed Ian Worby, who is the national leader for Christians for Israel Australia, and he is currently leading a team in Israel from Australia and New Zealand that is there to provide love, support and care to the victims of the terrorist attacks on October 7th last year. He joins me now from Israel on the ground. Ian, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be speaking with you. I'm actually in an underground car park in Tel Aviv with an organisation called Aaron's Angels, and the team here are packing clothing and food and supplies for displaced Israelis, about 250,000 Israelis who've been displaced both down in Gaza in the south and up near the Lebanon border in the north. And so they're all living out of hotels or family and friends or whatever. And so a lot of them left with just the clothes on their back. And so we're helping to provide them with the wherewithal just to live here 6 months later after that tragic massacre on October 7th.
Yeah, that is a logistical challenge, isn't it, for any nation? 250,000 displaced people. The human cost of those terrorist attacks really can't be understood, can they, Ian, unless you're on the ground as you are in Israel. What is the mood in the nation right now?
It's very somber. There's nobody in this country that doesn't know someone or has been personally impacted by the war. They know people who've been killed, injured, the hostages. Over 320,000 reserve soldiers have been called up. I was just speaking with a lady last night. She works for the Jewish Agency, and her husband has been away for 70 days from her and her children, serving in the reserve part of the army. And of course, sadly, some of them don't come home.
Yeah, so you're really in a nation now that's at war, and it's something that the majority of people in Australia right now can't understand. It's so foreign to us, but it's so real. And how are you and your team, who are made up of people from Australia and New Zealand, how are you handling all that emotion and the sights and the sounds and the interactions you're having with the people there on the ground?
Yeah, it's been very sobering. It's been very emotionally confronting, Andrew. A few days ago, we travelled down along the Gaza envelope area. We visited a couple of the small communities. They're called kibbutz or kibbutzim in the plural. We visited one called Kfar Azar, where over 65 people were brutally killed and massacred by the Hamas terrorists. The community that's normally 900 people, there was only 3 people in caretaker mode there. We had a local guide, he's 74, his name is Ralph, and he took us around and he showed us the unbelievable carnage that has taken place. And these were his friends, these were his neighbours. He would point to a home and say an old pensioner lady in there was brutalised, and then he'd take us up to another home and show us all the bullet holes everywhere and tell us that his friend, who was in his 70s, would raise racing pigeons, and on the morning of October the 7th, which was a Sabbath, it was a holy day, he had released his pigeons, and on the way back he was sprayed by machine gun fire, and he actually discovered his friend's body. There's just so much carnage, and it was just so confronting. Everybody, we were just stunned. And yet we were welcomed with such friendship. And everywhere we've been, people have been quite emotional and said, we appreciate that you've come from the other part of the earth to bring us comfort. And we feel it's like a big warm hug. And because they're feeling so isolated and alone, Andrew, politically, Israel's become a pariah. Sad to say, even our own government is showing signs of stress and tension in supporting Israel. And I'm even sadder to say that even in some parts of the Christian church, they're either very silent or showing lack of support. And I think this is an opportunity for us as Christians to put aside politics, to put aside our own ideas and just recognise this is a time for us to show Christian love and solidarity and to bring comfort to the Lord's people.
Yeah, and that's what you and your team are doing, Ian, and it's very encouraging that you're there and you're getting such a warm response. And as you're speaking, it reminded me of the fact that in the First World War, Australian and New Zealand soldiers were there in that very land you're in now, and obviously involved in that famous battle in Beersheba. But I know many of the Australian and New Zealand soldiers knew their Bibles, and they knew where they were, and they also had a love for the Israeli or the Jewish people back then. And here we are, over 100 years later, and you and your team are there doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, we drove past a number of the battlefields. We went past a place which is called the Anzac Trail, right next to Gaza. And tomorrow we're going to be travelling up to the north of the Galilee to a place called Samak, where the Australian light horse, including the Queensland Black Watch, which is our indigenous horse riders, they took a strategic location. It was a railway station at Samak. They did it by moonlight. It was the last recorded charge of the light horse, and it came at great personal cost. And there's a statue of an indigenous light horseman tending the grave of a fallen white Australian. And the name of this statue is called Greater Love Has No Man Than This. And that's taken from John's Gospel, where Jesus said, there is no greater love than when a man lays down his life for a friend. And so, just a great memorial showing the cost in blood that our nation and New Zealand and the rest of the British Expeditionary Forces at that time, we helped to liberate the nation of Israel from 400 years of Ottoman Islamic occupation and fulfilled Bible prophecy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I haven't heard about that statue, that monument you saw. That's something that should be broadcast across Australia in Indigenous Australians and what we call white Australians working together, fighting together, serving together, and even dying together. It's something for every Australian to be proud of.
Yeah, it sure is. And it makes us proud to be Australian and New Zealand representatives to come here and to not just say we're loving you, we're praying for you. You have a large number of friends in other parts of the world that are standing with you in solidarity, but to bring practical support. Like even as I speak, I'm seeing our team packing boxes of clothing and food, which they will send off to some of these displaced families and even to some of the soldiers, because a lot of the soldiers were called up without any notice. So even sending soldiers things like, clean underwear and things like that, just practical help. Also, we visited a small kibbutz called Nia Yitzhak, which is about 6 kilometres from Rafah, where all the fighting in Gaza is taking place. While we were there, we could hear the sounds of the explosions off in the distance, and this is a community of 600, and we were standing in the dining room, which needs restoration. And so the very generous supporters of Christians for Israel Australia are raising over $200,000 to restore this community dining hall, which will service 600 people, and also the communities in a 5-kilometre radius, because in Israeli culture, everything revolves around food. And so when people come for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, for all the special feasts of Israel, for birthdays and weddings and all those sorts of things, the community dining hall is a central hub for these communities. And so we're going to be involved in restoring that to help motivate people to come back. A lot of them are displaced, as I said earlier. They're living in places like Eilat and near the Dead Sea and so on, but they're wanting them to bring them back. And so we need the dining hall facility up and running again so people can feel that they can return to these beautiful little rural communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Ian. Just getting back to that kibbutz you visited where 65 people were murdered, to give our listeners an idea, how big is that kibbutz? Like, imagine you're in an Australian suburb, where we have, a few streets. How many streets would be in that kibbutz? Like, is that the equivalent of 2 blocks in an Australian neighbourhood? Or tell me about that.
Yeah, it's spread out over maybe 4 or 5 streets, little community homes with nice gardens, a community school, a community clinic, a community like a mini supermarket. 950 people is the population of Kfar Aza. And like I said, there was just three people looking after it. And we were greeted by Ralph, who's lived there for 40-something years. He can follow his lineage all the way back to the Aaronic priestly tribe. He was just a great guide, and he knew the story of everyone that was there and really brought their memories back to life for us to appreciate the incredible loss that this community has suffered. And the whole nation is grieving. They're in shock. These are people that wanted peace with their neighbours in Gaza. Ralph and 3 other of his friends every week would drive their car at their own expense and pick up Palestinians from the Gaza border and drive them all the way to Jerusalem for free medical attention. They would employ thousands of these Palestinian workers who would get day passes to come out and work in the rural areas of southern Israel. They would earn 6 times as much as what they could earn in Gaza. And yet these same people repaid this hospitality with brutality, with no mercy, killing old women, children, mothers, and doing unspeakable things that I can't talk about on the radio.
Yeah, it's horrible. But I just wanted our listeners to get an idea. So imagining a neighbourhood in Australia where we all live with 5 or 6 or 7 streets around us with houses, 65 people murdered. I mean, if one person is murdered in Australia in a neighbourhood, the whole suburb is really affected by it. Well, imagine 65 people within 5 or 6 streets of where you live being murdered, and as you said, Ian, indiscriminately, old people, young people, just butchered. It's just horrible, Ian, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of us, all of the Christians in Australia who are listening right now, for going there with your team, Ian, and just doing the little you can and showing the love and support that you guys are. And this is obviously a problem that's so big, only God can really fix it, and we're all just praying, Ian, for you and your team, and also for Israel, for peace in Jerusalem, for God's will to be done and his kingdom to come in that part of the world right now. And I also want to thank you for giving us this time today, Ian, to share with us what's going on there on the ground in Israel.
No, it's my pleasure. If anyone wants to follow what we're doing, we have our Facebook page at Christians for Israel Australia. Just do a search on Facebook, you'll find us there. And yeah, we appreciate your prayers and your support and your interest, as together we will stand with our brothers and sisters here in the land of Israel.
That's Ian Worby, the national leader for Christians for Israel Australia. Thanks again, Ian.
Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.